your blood. By your blood, I'm covered by your blood. Your precious blood, your holy blood.
On the day of Pentecost, Peter with the 11 stood up as he proclaimed Christ, and Peter said, this Jesus, and he testified, and he was the witness along with the others. He was a spokesman for Jesus with the support of the others. But they were witnesses of the life of Jesus. They were witnesses of the things he did and said. And from that, they presented the teachings of Jesus, or the commands of Jesus, and Jesus' example, or the example of Jesus, which is, here is how you should live. Look at the life of Jesus. That's what we witnessed. And here's what the Jesus who we experience has to say. He said that we should do thus. So the commands and example of Jesus we find with the sent of the Christ. As the Father sent me, so I'm sending you. If you don't have apostolic teaching, then you do not have the commands and example of Christ, because you were not there. Did you see Jesus open the blinded eyes? No, you weren't there. Did you see him feed the 5,000? No, you were not there. Were you with Jesus? Were you with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration? No, you were not there. Just like Moses was with God on the mountain, so he could give the Israelites instructions of God, because God called Moses to reveal himself to Moses and to use Moses as his general in Israel. So Jesus revealed himself to the apostles, but in particular, he revealed to Peter, James, and John on the Mount of Transfiguration. They saw Jesus in his glory, like Moses saw the glory of God. So did you see Jesus on the mountain? Were you there when he calmed the ocean with his words? Were you there when he opened the eyes of the blind? When he called Lazarus from the dead? And were you there with him when he came, when he prayed until his sweat was like drops of blood? Were you there with him when he was journeying to Calvary? Were you there with him when he suffered and died? And were you there when he appeared to the group when the door was closed? He came and he sat with them and ate with them. Were you there with Jesus when he had fellowship with the group of believers after his resurrection? No, you were not there. So you cannot be a witness. You cannot be a primary witness. When you go in court, they ask you, sir, so the man who was doing ABC, is he in this room? Yes. Could you point? Yes, the man is sitting over there. Let the court know, let the jury know, let the court know that the witness points to the defendant, eyewitness, or you have DNA evidence, something that someone have to testify to, that they are first-hand witness of a given piece of information, or they saw something, or they heard something. Witness, giving your testimony of what you saw, what you heard, what you experienced. So the apostles heard Jesus, they saw him, they were with him, so they would have to be the witnesses of Christ. Jesus in Luke 24 verse 48, you are witnesses of these things, that the Messiah would suffer and die and raise from the dead on the third day. You are witnesses of this. So on the day of Pentecost, Peter said, we are witnesses of this. When Peter came to Cornelius' home, that Peter said that God chose us as witnesses of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. We are witnesses of this. So if you're going to find the commands and example of Jesus, which define Christian, if you're going to find the commands and example of Jesus, which constitute Christian, then you must turn to the disciples, the apostles, who were with Jesus from the beginning to the end. Second, the commands and example of Jesus are pre-Eurocentric, meaning before the council gathered at Nicaea, 325, before the council of Constantinople, before the council of Ephesus, before the first three church councils. We have the commands and example of Jesus. That means the teachings, the doctrines, the things Jesus did and said all took place before all the church councils. Which means that you cannot be a primary voice of Christian orthodoxy. You cannot be a primary voice of Christian orthodoxy if you are not with Jesus. Simply put, the teachings, the commands, and example of Jesus are pre-Eurocentric. That is before the gospel and the Christian faith came to Europe. I emphasize Europe because Europe had the greatest influence on the church and Christian doctrine. Some people, it appears to some as if the church started in Italy with the Romans. It didn't. The Romans in the beginning persecuted Christians. That happened in 300s AD. The first empire got saved. Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. Christians no longer were persecuted for their faith. These things happen, but this is many years later. It's almost like imagine the time span from when United States of America became a nation in 1776 until somewhere in the 21st century. That's a long time ago. In the time of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, in the time of Benjamin Franklin, in the time of Moore, the time of Quincy Adams, the time of the first Americans, the time of Dr. Benjamin Rush. Imagine from that time in the 1700s until now in the 21st century. That's a long span. So that's how long from when Christ walked the earth and when the gospel was first preached to when Nicaea gathered, when they have the first church council that dealt with Arianism, that denied the divinity of Christ, and they settled those issues. But at the same time, we have to remember we cannot think of Christ's divinity and turn to Nicaea as the final authority. If we're going to think of Christ's divinity, we have to turn to the declaration of Moses, the psalmist, the prophet, what they say about the Messiah, and what Jesus said, and the ministry and the revelation of Christ that came to the apostles as we have in the New Testament. So to get the authority, or to have the final authority, the final voice of Jesus' divinity, we must turn to the Holy Bible, not to Nicaea, not to Constantinople, not to Ephesus, and not to any church council that happened after. Said another way, Christian in its authenticity is biblical before the time of Eurocentric or European influence on the church. It's not only the Europeans who influenced Christian church, Christian thought, Christian customs, but I say Eurocentric because Europe had guided the church and church doctrine, church practices for the past 2,000 years. That is post-apostolic church doctrine and functionality dominated by European thought. If you're going to find true Christian doctrine, you have to go to what was there before it was invaded, before it was infected. If you're going to find pure Christian teaching and customs, then we have to find it before it was infected by Eurocentric and Gentile / pagan thought and customs. True Christian in doctrine and custom is pre-Eurocentric.